Welcome to the PRCA's podcast Fuse, the global podcast for PR, marketing and communication professionals. Our special guest today is Julietta Dexter. Welcome, Julietta.
Thank you for having me, Farzana.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Julietta's incredible background for our listeners who haven't heard of her, but there's so many of us in the industry who have followed Julietta for decades. At the age of 26, Julietta set up the communication store, TCS, one of the leading strategic brand development and communication partners to the world's best brands. Over the course of 25 years as CEO, Julietta steadily expanded the company both in terms of staff and client portfolio. In doing this, she remained ever faithful to the ethos and values of honest business delivery, the core of TCS. TCS championed female empowerment in the business community for a quarter of a century. Further to that, she was the co-founder and Chief Growth and Purpose Officer at Science Magic. Julietta is one of a small number of UK-based female CEOs and also active in a number of business and charitable organizations. She is chair of Smart Works Charity, a board director of NCH at Northeastern, and a member of the WACL. She served as a member of the Cambridge University Comms Group Working Group and a member of the Roundtable on Creative Entrepreneurship. She served as a trustee for Beauty Banks, a charity combating hygiene poverty in the UK, and a regular fundraiser for the Great Ormond Street Hospital. Julietta has regularly featured in the PR Week Power Week and also achieved number one spot the TCS in the top 10 list of agencies for fashion, beauty, and luxury comms. In 2017, she was nominated by Luxury Daily as one of the luxury women to watch, and in 2013, she won a CEW UK Achiever Award. Now, Julietta, my God, reading your biography just makes me feel like a huge underachiever. But the first thing I wanted to know is, how do you pack so much into your day? Because, just to have a job that eats up the majority of your waking hours, and then juggling it with sort of work-life balance, and then you're also doing all of this in terms of industry initiatives as well as charities. I'm really interested to know, you must have the most organized approach to your day. So could you talk me through a typical work day in your life?
Yes, of course. And it's funny listening to you sort of reel all of that off, because it sort of sounds quite a lot, all in one a minute or so. But actually, sort of doing it's been many years of testing and learning and trying and doing and succeeding and failing and everything in between. My day starts with a cup of tea. I'm very lucky that there is an enormous amount of kindness in my household. And I am brought a cup of tea in the morning, which is something that I do not take for granted. And it sort of always sets me up very well. My husband and I are also very faithful yogis. So we practice together. And I think that whether it's 10 minutes or 30 minutes, we'll get there. And that again is normally something that happens in the morning and sets us up very well for the day. I have to sleep. I like to sleep at least 8 hours. And it's funny, I've listened to many female business leaders, and the question, what would you tell your younger self? Sleep more. And I was with a wonderful jeweler recently, a sustainable jeweler, and she said, I have to go to bed because otherwise I make really bad business decisions. And I thought, gosh, I wish I'd been intelligent and not stayed up till 5 o'clock in the morning thinking I was being useful. And then I really am a list writer, I'm afraid. I have been taught and learned to use an OKR process in terms of objectives and key results and measuring what I actually do each quarter, because I think that a lot of the time we spend time like headless chickens, sort of doing all sorts of things all at once. And then you get to the end of the quarter and you think, gosh, did I not do that because I was so busy being distracted by something else? So I think that the rigor and the discipline of learning how to figure out in the next 3 months, what are the 4 things that you're going to be doing that are really going to move the needle and make some impact that you can measure, that has been a very helpful discipline. And, as a person, people say that I'm very, very disciplined. I definitely believe in delayed gratification to the point that I quite seldom get to the gratification. But I'm never the one to watch the movie first on the aeroplane. By the time I've finished my work, we've landed and I've missed the movie. But I think that the truth of the matter is that I just love what I do, and I always have. So whilst yes, it is work, and it's hard days and good days, I love it. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have had the opportunities and experiences and getting to know people that if I didn't have this career, I would not know. And they have enormously enriched my experience on this planet.
And your rigor and discipline that you bring to your business and your charity work in terms of setting quarterly OKRs and so forth, do you also apply that to sort of other elements of your life, like your health and your well-being and your social life and so forth? Or do you just use those lenses really for sort of business and the charitable work that you do? So are you disciplined in all aspects?
Yeah, I think I am, but I hope without sort of being boring. But I'm very sort of disciplined about my diet. I'm quite disciplined about exercise, time with friends, time with family. I've also got a brain that can divert itself completely. I've always been the person that if I've got 13 meetings in a day, I can just switch off from what I was doing before and give myself completely to what is now and what is present. Um, and again, I feel very comfortable that way. I'm not sort of depleting myself. I feel very happy, and I will sort of look at my diary and say, well, how many times have I actually had a nice dinner with a friend? This month. So I think it is probably everywhere in my life. And where does it come from? Um, I've learned a lot from how people waste a lot of time. The busier you are, the more honed the machine gets, right? So if you give me two things to do today, I might not do them. But if you give me 20, we'll probably crack through the whole lot and we'll be fine. And that will feel like a day well spent. I was also, without getting overly personal, told quite often as a sort of, I suppose, quite ambitious young person at school that I couldn't and that I shouldn't try and that I wasn't sort of that caliber. And a wonderful coach and mentor to me, Liz Villani, said to me that part of my value set is competitive rebellion. So all you have to do is tell me that it's probably not possible, and I'll find the way.
That's fantastic. So actually, whoever made those comments to you earlier in your life actually set the perfect environment for you to flourish and to thrive. So I wanted to know a little bit about people in PR. They often cite issues around well-being because our work is very sort of deadline driven. There's a number of our results that are outside of our control, especially if you're working in media relations. Events in itself, incredibly stressful, and so people also cite that having to keep up with the news constantly. And the news has a tendency to focus on the negative because that's the way our brains are wired for horizon scanning. So, how do you consume the news? And because of course it's just I think I remember growing up, it was a few print and a few broadcast channels, and now it's just ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And so I was just interested to know what sort of outlets, how do you inbuild sort of keeping up with the news throughout your day? And do you also feel that it has an impact, just that sort of relentless negativity of the news cycle, or because you're in luxury, you're buffered a bit from the sort of the sort of breaking news that comes around sort of geopolitics and war and all the other sort of negative aspects of the news?
I think it's a really interesting question. And, in my sort of angry mind, I feel the media is so responsible for so much. And I find that very, very difficult philosophically to be at peace with. I suppose the way that I look at it, Farzana, is that I think there's a big difference between news and researched commentary on world events. So, to answer a specific question, I do look at the BBC podcast when I wake every morning. And to be honest with you, find it quite unfulfilling. And in a world of fake news, and having done quite a lot of work recently in Saudi Arabia, I know that what we are being fed is very different in whatever part of the world that you come from or are consuming media in, which I find deeply disturbing. And so much hatred in the world is driven by ignorance and lack of knowledge. And so that really sort of stresses me out. So to me, a sort of news feed is the BBC. I look at the New York Times online as well to see a different perspective. Um, and then I read the FT every weekend because there are various people, to your point about well-being and women at work, that I really want to know what their thoughts are. So to me, that Saturday media consumption is more about thinking of, I don't know, Gillian Tett or Camilla Long and people like that. And so what are they thinking about what's going on in the world? And I find that much more enriching and sort of something that I can cope with better, if you like. As humans, we are iniquitous and we're much more interested in tragedy and crisis than we are in wonderful, lovely, happy stories. And that's really what the media industry has fed itself off. But I do also look at things like Atmos. I do look at things like Nat Geo because it does give you, actually, National Geographic, together with NASA, has got two of the greatest social media followings in the world, which gives me real hope that people are, in the end, interested in the wonderment of this planet. And that sort of balances me out, if you like, in terms of, God, I don't think I can cope with this anymore. And then realizing that there are some extraordinary and wonderful people in the world doing amazing things.
That's so lovely actually, because it's reminded me that I used to love subscribing to the National Geographic, and just the visuals themselves were just so inspiring. And I think I'm going to actually go on their Instagram and start following them.
Have a look at Atmos as well, Farzana, because it's just a celebration of the luck and the fortune that we have. And so I find that great and very helpful. And then I do read, and I have Audible, and I listen to books. And then I enjoy podcasts, the Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell podcast. I will listen to that. Um, and that's really it. I try not to be the endless scroller, because I think you can, to your point about being organized and disciplined in the day, I mean, just look at your screen time. That's, I never look back and say, now that was time well spent, now that was really good, great. I don't.
So I first came across you because I stumbled across your book, Good Company: How to Build a Business Without Losing Your Values. And what I wanted to know before we go into into the start of your career and all of the incredible work that you've done, I wanted to know, do you have like an overarching philosophy on life in terms of your mission for work? Because a lot of the work that you do, be it your charity work, the book that you've written, your approach to work, it's really embedded in a set of values, giving back, across multiple different sort of charities, and quite wide-ranging charities as well. So from children to women and so forth. And I just wanted to know, do you have this sort of overarching mission in life that you feel that your work has given you the ability to? You mentioned obviously earlier that the work has enabled you to connect and meet the most incredible people and work alongside people. But have you ever had this overarching sort of mission? I think the Japanese, they call it the ikigai, where your sort of purpose and your profession meet.
I think that there are a number of answers to your question. First of all, I think I was brought up um, in a very, very fortunate environment. And I think one thing I always say to people is never, ever apologize for where you're born, because you cannot be responsible for that. And I feel that in the world, hopefully an increasingly diverse and equitable and inclusive world, that I've been very fortunate. I, had a very, very, in my opinion, privileged upbringing, and my father was able to pay for the best education that I could have. And therefore, I feel a sort of sense of duty to do something with that. So that's very much a sort of underarching, sort of holding me principle. When I started the communications store, one does think hard about one's market circumstances. Sort of what's going on in the world, and how should I respond and react to that. And as you may have read in Good Company, I was rather sort of terrified actually by the sort of toxic business culture that I found when I left university. And I thought, this isn't for me. This is not who I am as a person. The sort of dog eat dog. I'm going to get to the top of the corporate ladder at all costs. And if I have to sort of, lose a few people along the way, that's fine with me. It wasn't fine with me. And again, I think in the book, I talk about my father's career, which was at a very different time in business history, but he was deeply loved as a leader, and he cared deeply about his staff. And I think that that has very much rubbed off on me. And I set up some values for myself. And this might sound sort of rather egotistical, actually, but I think it's not only how you do something, but how you behave. Like, I'm assuming that a banker knows how to run a bank or run an account. What makes the difference there? You hope that a dentist knows how to do their job when you go and sit in the chair, but it's how they behave, it's how they interact. So when I wrote my business plans for the communication store, one was a financial model in terms of what I thought this company was going to do, and the other was a cultural one. And I wanted to try to be clever, to try to be considerate, to try to be considered. It was the beginning of social media and digital communications, and people were just firing things off without thinking about them twice. And then maybe also to be countercultural. Just because everybody else in business seemed to be behaving in one way, did I have to do that against my own value set, or could I actually try and be myself? I have a very, very strong feeling, Farzana, that business has to become a greater force for good in the world. I think that the political communities are in disarray. And if they're getting their house in order, it's going to take time. NGOs and charities are very, very powerful. And because of government, they are needed so much. But private sector and businesses that are successful and I enhance and make money really can be a force for good and a force for change. And I see that daily at the charity SmartWorks.
I wanted to just sort of bring in a conversation that I had with a friend of mine called Simon Enright, and he was talking about something that you've just mentioned, how you have the business sector and the charity sector, and how in a way they're sort of merging into each other. So before they were sort of very binary, charity focused on sort of doing good work, purpose driven, and businesses on the bottom line. And then with stakeholder capitalism, they started merging, where businesses started thinking about CSR and ESG and their sort of footprint, and then charities started having the rigor of impact and not just give us your money and we'll spend it well, but actually having much more sort of demanding from stakeholders and donors, and mainly because you had also a lot of business people like Bill Gates and so forth sort of go from business and setting up their own philanthropic platforms. And so this conversation I had with Simon, he was sort of just telling me about how he's actually noticed this sort of shift between both of them, which actually is a win-win for both sectors, because they could both learn from each other. And that's been really interesting. So Julietta, I wanted to start off with, was your father involved in the comms or media sector? How did you even know about the world of public relations, and how did you enter the world?
My father was in insurance, so very, very different business. And actually, my uncle, I think, my father's brother had a marketing company at one point, but I was very little. I didn't really know very much about it. At school, when I did a careers tests, those multiple choice tests for careers, they said that I was going to be a social worker. And to a degree, I think that I have become a social worker, but just in a different field. Again, I care deeply about people. And if I want to build somebody's brand and really help them build a business, I will do that with, I hope, passion, care, humility, strength, and wisdom. Um, as you read in the book, my father died very suddenly as I was about to take my finals at university. So my world sort of slightly fell upside down. And I do think that some people who are quite driven have got a sort of personal tragedy somehow, or something that's happened to them in their lives that sort of gives them a very big jolt, which was certainly the case for me. And I decided that I wanted to save the world because in my grief, I think that was, so really I was going to point towards the charitable sector. And I got my first role at the English Speaking Union, which is a charity that fosters good relationships between the UK and the US. Wonderful charity. And I was very lucky to have a fantastic boss who taught me a lot. He was the marketing manager there. And I was very, very lucky to be the administrator of a very illustrious board of trustees, which I was sort of doing the secretarial duties for. And there were three people on that board, one of whom was the publishing director at Hearst, National Magazines as it was at the time. Another one was a very wealthy philanthropist, and another one was part of the Chanel family. And they said to me, what are you doing here? You can speak languages. You are a multitasker. It's clear that you are an all-rounder, which I think is what a career in PR requires. You should get out there and have a career. And then you can build a business network to draw from to be able to do good. Because at the moment, right at the beginning of your career, you're going to find it very hard to raise funds yourself. So our advice is go out, have a business career. And then, in a way, it's what's happened exactly, Farzana, is that now as chair of SmartWorks, I can use my business experience and network and contacts to help the clients that we look after at SmartWorks. And back to your friend's point, I think he and I are very aligned that I believe that in a professional life, everybody should have a voluntary role and a paid role. And yes, as you said, CSR is certainly C-suite agenda discussion and agenda points. I went to a lunch recently in New York that was sort of, power entrepreneurial women. And everybody went round the table and introduced themselves. And everybody started by introducing their voluntary role before their paid role. And, 10 or 15 years ago, you would have sat at that lunch and said how rich and powerful you were and how successful and how many private planes you had. That is not the case so much anymore. And actually, with my own daughters who are in the workplace, we talk a lot about giving back, even if it's just a tiny thing, even if it's an hour of your week, you can start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's so enriching to volunteer, and it's incredible also because I started volunteering in my 20s, and one of the unintended consequences of volunteering is you actually meet people from completely different walks of life and just expands your horizons. And I just think it pays back in ways that you would never have even imagined. And it really is. I agree. It's definitely, my daughter's doing her internship next week actually at a charity, so I'm really excited about that.
Wonderful.
So you set up your first business when you were 25, and for some of our listeners, who are thinking, should I set up, my own agency or, my own consulting firm? What advice would you give them? Obviously, at the age of 25, that's really incredible. But there's people thinking about setting up businesses in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So what advice would you give for those people who are thinking, should I stay with my job or should I go out there and set something up?
Well, you know, when you're younger, you are much more naive and much more open to risk, and you're much more ignorant, so you don't know really what the possible pitfalls could be. I mean, I would say at the moment, as we were chatting about earlier, Farzana, is that I think this is one of the most difficult, or if not the most difficult economic climate that we've ever been in, I've ever been in my age group. And I'm finding that really, really challenging. You know, agency world, I think, is challenged at the moment, and across many sectors there are lots of redundancies, lots of company closures, liquidations, etc. And that's all very, very, very difficult. So part of me is like, if you've got a job, stick it out, because you've got some safety and security there, which I think is very, very valuable. I suppose another piece of advice that I would give is, if you really, 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 really want it, go for it. And I think that my sort of desire and ambition was cultural. It was, surely this is the most incredible world of PR and comms and brands and fashion and beauty and goodness knows what. But surely you can do this in a place where people feel valued and appreciated and loved, frankly. And so that was really my sort of, I don't think anything could have stopped me doing that. Even if I failed, it didn't matter. I had a wonderful conversation once with the singer Lulu, and Lulu, you know, she's been singing since she was a young preteen girl. And she's been very popular and not so popular. And she's been a national treasure and she's been all of these things. And I asked her the question once, and she just said, Juliet, if I didn't sing, I'd die. There's no point me being here. And I think that if you've got that type of passion for something, you should do it. It's vocational. And the other thing that I would say, two things, if I may, Farzana, is one is, please don't just start something up. And I think a lot of people get very excited about the launch, and I'm going to set up a business and I'm going to do that. As I tell all clients, that's the easy bit. Let's not worry about the launch. Don't lose any sleep or get too exhausted by the launch, because that's the easy part. We can all do that. It's like 25 years later, are you still going? And have you still got the fire? And as I said to our CEO at SmartWorks just before this call, I said, Tiff, we're at the beginning of our careers. It's now. This is the beginning. That was just a practice. You know, retirement and pension ages are going to be pushed further and further out. This is our time. We've got some real knowledge now. And we will talk about female empowerment in the workplace, but I genuinely believe that we've got a lot to contribute to the economy now. And so I think the final point that I wanted to make is, actually economic crisis is a very, very good moment to start businesses. And as you said earlier, Farzana, you can disrupt, you can innovate, you can push against something that hasn't been working and maybe hasn't been working for a long time. So if you have genuinely got an idea that is truly useful to the world or to who you're trying to sell to, I would go for it.
Brilliant advice. One of the incredible analogies you shared with me during the early conversation was about the way that you look at leadership. And you look at it in terms of not that sort of traditional hierarchical sense, but leadership is, if you imagine a company, an organization is a little bit like a tree, and the leaders are the roots, and their job is to bring in all the nutrients and everything that they need so that the trees, so that the branches and the tiniest leaf has everything it needs to thrive. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy and such a sharp differentiation from that hierarchical sort of command and control, because a lot of, I think, organizational structures were sort of built upon military structures in the early years, and just that shift from culture. Now, what I wanted to ask, when you set up your first business when you were 25 and you talked about rebellion and you talked about how culture was so important, was it a sort of a creative expression to set up a culture that you felt was definitely not the norm at the time, and you wanted to see if it would work, if you could still have a successful organization where people are treated as human beings, and in a culture where you could thrive and you felt as if there are other people out there who were looking for a similar cultural space to work in?
Yes, is the answer. And 1995 is a long time ago, and I would sit with people and say, really today, what you would describe as an ED&I strategy for a business. And people would laugh at me and say that I was a white, posh, blonde girl, and what did I know about anything? And now I get very sort of irritated slightly, although I'm thrilled because the world seems to be having a different discourse. But at the same time, people still look at the receptionist as a second class citizen. And now, of course, we are deeply worried about diversity and equity in the workplace of people of color, of different genders, of different sexuality, and certain ethnic minorities, etc. And sometimes I say quite sort of rude things. I say, don't worry about that. You're still treating your receptionist like, she's, not really very helpful around here and certainly a second class citizen. And that was really what I was pushing against. So I think that I have put my money where my mouth is. And that's where perhaps Farzana, I can talk about science magic at this point, because and without wanting to get sort of overly personal, my understanding of leadership is a duty of care of others, that you have got skills to look after an organization, be it a school, a charity, a business, a hospital, anything you like. And that's not a position of power. That is a position of duty and privilege towards others. And that's how I look at leadership. And that's why I think that the voluntary liquidation of Science Magic, which was the second business that I was involved with, has been deeply, deeply painful for me, because the one thing that I was trying to do more than anything was look after others. And of course, a lot of people lost their jobs because Science Magic, for a whole host of reasons, a sort of perfect storm, if you like, had to be put by myself and my business partner into voluntary liquidation. So that weighs on my heart very, very, very heavily. And so that's what I think about. I think org charts are one of the most divisive business tools that live out there. I have never been in a room where I've brought what I would call a traditional triangular org chart to the table and everybody in the room says thrilled, absolutely love it, really glad that I'm right at the bottom of the pyramid. They've never said that to me. And I also know afterwards, if I've ever done that, which I haven't for years, people say, why is Farzana just a little bit higher up on the org chart than me? I thought we were the same. And so I just sort of feel that's a totally useless, perhaps military, which may work in a military sense, Farzana. I hadn't thought about that. But to me, an organization is a nucleus. And if you look at an amoeba, which is the center of life, in an amoeba, there are lots of different functions, mitochondria, all sorts of different things if you go back to your biology lessons. And they all look different and they all have different functions. But if you remove just one of them, the amoeba dies. And that's how I think about the tree of an organization. That's a living, breathing, constantly evolving being, if you like, and that really the directors, the board, the C-suite should be the roots of the tree, holding it up. The trunk is the values of who you are as human beings and what you stand for, irrespective of your diversity. And then the leaves are the talent of tomorrow, that you are very busy nurturing and growing and leading. And guess what? It's cyclical. The leaves fall and feed the roots. And that's how I think about things. Many things are round for me, Farzana, not very angular.
I absolutely, absolutely love that energy. The other thing I wanted to ask is just picking pieces from your incredible career. You also expanded to the US, and I just spent a few weeks there on holiday, and it's funny, the UK and the US, because you sort of imagine the US to be quite similar to the UK because we speak the same language and we've got some similar cultural reference points. But my God, there is a huge difference, not only within the US, but between obviously UK and US. And I just wanted to ask, when you set up a business in the US, how did you navigate those sort of cultural differences? Or did you find actually it was very similar to working in the UK?
I think there are some hard and fast learned rules. And I always think when I'm doing a podcast like this, am I being useful to people? Like, there's only one reason to do this, is like, if I've had knowledge that you don't have to make the same mistakes as me, then great, let's do it. Never open a business in the US without an American being very, very, very senior and leading the business. Only go to America as a UK business if you've got client work that needs to take you there and wants you there. Be incredibly unarrogant about why you're there. I think that perhaps my younger self had stars in my eyes about, oh, yes, and I'm going to open a business in America as well. And that was sort of naive ambition more than anything else. And then I think, the other rules are, you probably have to go out there and be there yourself. And again, as an entrepreneur, you could argue that maybe you're not the right person to open the business in the US, right? And maybe the services are going to be different. And maybe you cannot mandate the way that you've, started your business, particularly as a sort of small to mid-size independent agency. You have to flex, and you have to listen, and you have to learn. The wonderful side of it for me, and I've always said this about myself, I'm committed to a life of learning. My horizons widened enormously by learning how to do business in the US. And I think that that's been very, very helpful to have greater context outside of a purely UK or European viewpoint. So absolutely no regrets, learnt so much and had a fantastic time along the way. And actually now, the only thing that I would also say is that the way that I did it, like, bricks and mortar, need an office, got to do this, the sort of traditional way, it's over. It's over. Now, I can spend, I think I've been to the States 3 times, 4 times this year, and I'm working with clients more globally. I don't have to have an office. I don't, you can just operate in a much freer way. And as I was talking to this chief executive of a big agency group, and he's like, look, if you want an office in Milan, Julietta, tomorrow, not a problem. Like, there's a desk, we're incorporated, go. It's fine. It's not what I thought was, like, I've got to save over £1 million worth of money to make sure that I can, put a lot of resource and money into.
It is great in a way because actually it became one positive outcome of the COVID era is it became acceptable for remote working, hybrid working, and to do business internationally, never having met your clients, and start the whole from winning the account to servicing the account and never meeting in person. And so I think it really does bring a lot of opportunity for those who want to set up alternative businesses or in other markets, but not necessarily go down the bricks and mortar because the lower barriers to costs such as setting up a physical office is actually culturally it's no longer the norm, which is wonderful. You mentioned earlier about diversity, equity, inclusion, and what struck me, having followed your career for since I've entered into the industry about 14 years ago, is I personally felt you were quite ahead of your time, where what you were discussing about sort of culture, and you were really, in essence, talking about inclusion for people to feel very safe, secure, very values-led organization rather than just looking at growth for the sake of growth. And what's happened is almost as if sort of culture has caught up with what you were espousing decades ago. Now, regarding diversity and equity and inclusion, one of the areas I wanted to discuss is people often think about diversity in terms of gender diversity, or they think about it in terms of ethnicity. But actually, you have so many other forms, from neurodiversity and also socioeconomic. But what I wanted to talk to you about was about the age barrier for women, because I'm in my late 40s, and I remember thinking, and I used to work in consumer PR in the early years, and now I just do sort of strictly government, corporate, and charities. And I remember thinking, God, should I move from consumer PR, and should I move into another sector where I would not be perceived as too old for that sector? And I remember having that kind of conversation with myself about when I was in my 30s, because I was sort of trying to future proof my career, and I was sort of consciously aware that there was age discrimination. And I don't know why, but I felt it was more in consumer and not in these other sectors. But I never really talked about it out loud. It was just like a conversation I had with myself. And I just wanted to know, obviously, you've written this article in the Management Today about age barrier for women, but I wanted to just talk about what your thoughts are in terms of age discrimination. And it's not just about actively being discriminated against, but it's also about how women think about themselves, because sometimes we also internalize and handicap ourselves in terms of thinking what can we achieve and what we can't achieve. So I just wanted to touch upon that subject because it's something that I thought about in my career.
Thank you for asking me that question, because if I've got a sort of mission or a purpose that is bubbling up to the surface, it is age discrimination for women in the workplace. And I think that as my career has evolved, and I'm sort of at different stages in my career, one minute you're not taken seriously because you're a young woman and you're frankly discriminated against. And then 5 minutes later, you're meant to be too old. Anne McElvoy, the economist, wrote a brilliant piece, I think, about, one minute you're having days off because you can have a baby, and then the next minute your company's being lovely to you because you can't have a baby and you've got the menopause. And so so it's just all so wrong. And I suppose what I'd like to see, Farzana, is a real change in culture. And I think that the way that that could happen is the actual economic need. Because if women in their mid 50s consider themselves as scrap heap material, we've got a big economic problem, because we all know already that the biggest single untapped resource for the economy is women. And at SmartWorks, we have an annual female unemployment index, which makes for very, very good reading. And as a data-driven organization, we know what is going on. The greatest number of unemployed women are between 16 and 24. We have increasing numbers of clients coming to us in their 50s and 60s. We know that pension ages are, if not being pushed out, discussed to be being pushed out. And again, I sort of feel that when the liquidation of Science Magic happened, a number of young women, particularly, and men, asked me if I was going to retire. And sort of, lucky you, Julietta. And I sort of looked at myself in the mirror and thought, gosh, if that's what I'm projecting, that's a bit of a worry. I then spoke to one of the people that I wrote about in the book, Gail Federici, who was co-founder of the John Frieda brands, and then Color Wow, another hugely successful consumer brand. And she said to me that she started Color Wow in her mid 60s. And that gave me so much confidence. And there is a rare breed of woman. Think of Diane von Furstenberg. Nobody's ever thought for a minute that Diane von Furstenberg was sort of not fashion anymore. And I think that I'm very inspired by that type of idea of chapters in your life, that you have to learn and grow and fight differently in every single different decade of your life, if you like. And a gentleman, professional peer of mine said, I'm being asked to, chair a lot of things and be Ned of lots of things. And as I get older, I seem to earn more money. Yeah, thanks for that. So I feel quite fiery about this. And I think that I'm extremely fortunate chairing SmartWorks that we do have a voice for unemployed women. And honestly, Farzana, I was talking to one of our clients recently from the Midlands, and she said she'd been to 3 job interviews and she'd been asked, A, how old she was, and B, whether she was a carer at home. Now, as far as you and I are concerned, that's illegal, but that is behaviour that is alive and well and happening. And so I really hope that the economic pressure will create change. And I'm delighted to say that Liz Kendall came to our centre in Leeds to announce her strategy. And Rachel Reeves has supported us at SmartWorks as well. So I'm hopeful and fire in my belly.
And just for our listeners, so what's been incredible about Julietta's journey is she set up the communication store, expanded to the US, and then Science Magic, and then Julietta's focus at the moment is SmartWorks. Can you give us some context around SmartWorks? What does it do? How long have you been involved in it? What's your vision for SmartWorks?
So SmartWorks was founded by my predecessor, Jules Hughes Hallett, 10 years ago. And SmartWorks does two things, and I think that SmartWorks does them very, very well. We dress uh, women for interviews, and we give them coaching for interviews. So we have 11 centres around the country. And Farzana, because of, I suppose, my background and other people's backgrounds in fashion and consumer goods, etc., a lot of brands are very generous to us. So we have beautiful showrooms with high quality clothing all around the country. And we will receive a client who is referred by normally a job centre, a referrer of some type, as you will know in your career. And once the client has a job interview, she can come to SmartWorks, she's referred to us, and we will dress her top to toe in beautiful clothing for her interview. She'll be given those clothing completely for free, and then she will work with a volunteer for interview coaching. 63% of our clients get the job. So that's a data point that is live at the moment. We look at our numbers every quarter. And so that is a very, very high percentage of clients getting the job. They then call us and tell us they've got the job. And they come back for what we describe as a second dressing to get another 5 pieces of clothing, which will create a small capsule wardrobe collection to make them feel confident at work. This year, we will have helped over 8,500 clients across the country. And we are in the beginning now of planning the next 3-year cycle. So a strategic plan for the next 3 years, which will have us, I think, open 2 more centres because the data tells us where the areas of greatest deprivation and need are. We've also been very, very fortunate to have a major trust donation. So that is around a centre in Bristol. So we will be opening a centre in Bristol soon, helped by the Rousing Trust to give us the funds to do that. And we will go to being a sort of £5 million charity, and we will be helping 10,000 women in our country every year from 2025.
That's absolutely extraordinary. And for people who want to find out a bit more about it, they just Google it and everything's on the website, and including ways of
Everything
support.
everything is there, and there are lots and lots of different ways to be involved. We have about 80 staff. We have about 700 volunteers. We have 6 boards of trustees across the country, and 8,500 clients. And so we're on a mission. We're a very, very vibrant and, frankly, I think, caring and wonderful community. I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to put my SmartWorks hat on at any time or point. And one really does see, because you see the clients in front of you every day in our centres around the country, you see them go from being crestfallen and shoulders down and punched backs to, yeah, I can do it. Shoulders back. I'm going to do this. And I've got this community around me who believes in me and that can help me get there. And that magic moment when a woman sees herself in decent clothing is very, very, very powerful and gives the belief and the confidence to, gain independence and get a job and be there for herself. So it's a fantastic organization, and there are so many ways on the website to be involved.
I've noticed, just following your career for as long as I have, that the supporting women is not a new chapter in your life. It's something that you've been doing from the beginning. So you also were involved with Women Supporting Women with the Prince's Trust, being an ambassador, the WACL, which is the Women in Advertising and Communication Leadership, as a member as well as a mentor. I just wanted to ask that you obviously, as a female founder from the age of 25, and there's a lot of conversation around the lack of female founders, not only in the PR industry, but across sectors. What would you say are the main reasons why there's such a gender disparity in terms of female founders? And importantly, female founders who have managed to scale their businesses to the level that you have scaled?
I think it's a change of culture, Farzana. You know, I'm the youngest of three girls, and there really was no discussion about my sisters ever going to university. So, you know, I think it's again, it's where you're born and when you're born gives opportunities or frankly lack of. Um, I suppose one reason why I feel so strongly about it was because there weren't that many mentors for me. And now I spend quite a lot of my time mentoring young women and men because I wish there'd been that for me. And I suppose that starting my own business, I found a letter that I wrote to my mother the other day saying, "Hey, I've got an amazing idea. I've left my job and I'm going to start a business." And her letter to me was, "No, please don't do that because you have no idea what you're doing." And so that was culturally, you know, what she knew. And I suppose that I want to sort of trailblaze and be there for younger people, not because I'm older and wiser, but because I know things that they don't know, and vice versa. And if I can help people to not, frankly, I always talk about myself as the tortoise and the hare, you know, of having been the tortoise for a very long time and help people get there a little bit more quickly, um, you know, that's an enormous privilege, and I just enjoy doing that.
And you're the chair of Smart Works, and you sit on a number of different boards. There's also a gender disparity with women on boards. Is there anything that you could signpost listeners who are women or those who wish to support women that they know? Because I often get women who approach me and say that they would like to get on a board, but they just don't know how to start and where to go and what to do, and it feels like a closed shop type of arrangement. So I sort of signposted them to a new role website where they can sign up. You've also got the Women on Boards organization. Apart from sort of joining these organizations, what other advice would you give to those people who have never had the opportunity to serve on a board, be it voluntary or a commercial organization, because you've been so successful at getting on so many boards? And what advice would you give to women who are listening who also want to get on boards, but they just don't know where to start, how to do it, what do they need to do? Do they need to sit on any? Do they need to do the course at the Institute of Directors or the FT, or what's your take on that?
Um, well, I think one thing that I've always tried to stand by really, really firmly is that I don't go and sit on a board because I'm a woman. So when I started this part of my career, I was like, what am I actually good at? And what could I really contribute to an organization? That's why I felt very lucky that I was approached for SmartWorks, because I believe genuinely that my professional skills could be helpful to that organization and therefore 8,500 women. So this is a bullseye for me in terms of, oh no, the skills that I've learned could really help here. So I have sat with myself and said, okay, what am I good at? And when I am approached, I think very, very hard, not about my gender, but about whether I really can contribute and deliver. That's the first thing. The second thing is that to your point, Farzana, there's a huge amount of lack of education and knowledge on what it actually means to be a trustee and what your responsibilities are and what the governance is about that. And I think, you know, without wanting to be disrespectful or critical, I think in some boards it's a little bit of a sort of badge. Oh, I'm a trustee. And, you know, you might read the papers, you might not, and turn up for a board meeting once a quarter, and that's it. I don't think that's what this is about, and I don't think that's nor should it be about that ever. And I think that some trustees have come a cropper in that way by having that attitude. So one thing we're trialing at SmartWorks is a sort of shadow trustee of younger trustees to bring them on a journey with us, so they will, you know, have access to everything that trustees have access to, but don't necessarily immediately have to, you know, have the full responsibilities of being a trustee, which can be quite onerous. And I'm very excited to see how that is, because again, I wish I'd had that. You know, I always remember thinking, gosh, one day maybe I'll be a trustee, and then one day you might be a trustee, and cripes, I hope I know how to do it, because, you know, you haven't had that experience. I hope other boards will do that as well, to encourage younger trustees to have a shadowing role so that they can learn on the job, so to speak. I think the FT has got really good courses. I really do. I've also been very, very admiring of Harvard Business School for summer courses. Clearly, those are a little bit more in terms of outlay, but I think, again, on your LinkedIn profile, having a Harvard Business School course is extremely helpful. And then, I've been very verbal about the fact that I don't take board roles because I'm a woman. And I will turn that around and say, I'm only going to do it if I think I really can contribute, irrespective of my gender or anything else, frankly.
And the other question is, having worked in communications for as long as you have, I've been working for about 14 years, and I absolutely still love it. Like it was the first day I entered the industry, because it's so fast moving. And the minute you think you've got a grip on the knowledge and understanding the sort of the basics, it's like tectonic shifts underneath you. Things start shifting because we're at this sort of nexus of multiple disciplines, and everything's constantly changing. And I absolutely love this industry. Do you still have a passion for the industry? Because I'm imagining you're bringing so much to the table at SmartWorks, and all the contacts you have with all of the consumer brands and bringing in all the partnerships. I can imagine all the incredible work that you're doing. Do you still have passion for the public relations industry?
Absolutely, and I'm offended by the question because because I'm not that old. And I sort of, it's again going back to the chapters. I sort of think, okay, TCS was chapter one. What a ride! What an era in business! Incredible brands, wonderful staff, fantastic clients. And then, I've done a lot of learning and searching and soul searching around science magic and what was strategically right, frankly, and potentially a little bit before its time, and what I did wrong and what I won't do again. And I think that if you love what you do, which I do, this is a process of renewal. This is a process not of thinking, God, I'm exhausted now, and I'll go and lie down under a tree and hope that nobody finds me again. It's been a time of real reflection for me as to what really matters for me now. I've had all of that. I mean, I've just been beyond fortunate. What am I going to do with all of that? And in a way, I'm going back to 1995, Farzana, where I really want to build brands that matter in a better world. That's what I want to do. And frankly, that's what I tried to do in 95. And I would be on a train going to Nottingham to the fair trade and natural products fairs to see whether I could get fair traded farmers to let me represent them. And they just didn't have enough money. The industry just, one of my first clients was Planet Organic. And I remember people saying to me, "Ugh, gosh, that's just a supermarket for rich people to buy expensive groceries." Well, luckily we had foot and mouth disease. And had we not had foot and mouth disease, which was a national crisis, the organic food movement probably wouldn't have taken off the way that it has. So I think I'm sort of going back more to who I was at the beginning, of building brands that matter in a better world and that can really help humans live better lives. I have trademarked responsible joy. So I'm not going to sort of start another sustainability company or practice or anything like that. But what I am going to do is, we are consumers. We can't help ourselves. And therefore, how could we do that without being dour or worthy or, oh gosh, nobody buys anything because it's sustainable. We buy things because we love them, I'm afraid. But if I could, at this point in my career, help build brands that matter in a better world, that are better for humans and for the earth, then I'm going right back to 1995, but I'm just doing it with probably a lot more conviction, and perhaps the world is better placed for me. I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful brand that I'm looking at the moment, which is a functional spirit brand. It's no alcohol. It's really classed as a food supplement, and it tastes delicious. Now, how many times have I gone out in the evening, even in our profession, and thought, I'm going to have a glass of wine, but I really shouldn't, and it will break my sleep and all of those things. But no, I don't want a glass of water. Things like that. Responsible joy tastes fantastic, has got an adaptogenic effect, and that's great. That's real progress. And to me, that's responsible joy.
I love that. And the reason why I asked is because I do come across a lot of women who sort of after 10 years in PR, they just exit. And they just feel as if it's just not compatible. And when you look at the stats for the PR industry, it's this funny industry where women, there's a significant proportion of PRs who are women, yet they're not at the sort of senior positions. They're not they're not at, running the agencies, or so it's this weird sort of industry where we're the majority, but yet just massively underrepresented. And you have this exodus, and it's sort of like, I don't know, 10 to 15 years mark. I have friends of mine who just leave the industry and go into completely different sectors, and that's why I was interested to know, from your perspective, after working in the industry, and ticking every and getting every award under the sun, and achieving more than all of us put together. I was just interested to know if you still have passion for it. So I think it's wonderful, and I think what you describe is actually what you've had from the outset, is to do business with passion and with purpose. And I'm really inspired to hear that, about this non-alcoholic brand, because actually I love going out, and alcohol has such a negative impact upon me. I wear this Whoop band, which kind of tells me how bad that glass of wine actually is. And so when I go to restaurants, the first thing I look for is the non-alcoholic, and they always have one or two lame, virgin Bloody Marys, and that's it. And there's no joy. I mean, apologies for those who love Bloody Marys, but there's just no joy in just tomato juice and some Worcestershire sauce. So I'm really glad that this is something that you're working on. I wanted to also ask, before we get to the closing section, I wanted to ask, what, other than SmartWorks and these other projects that you're working on, what's your vision for your next chapter? Because you talk about your career in terms of chapters, and you have achieved so much, including this incredible book, which is what inspired me to reach out to you. What's your vision for your next chapter?
Um, my vision for the next chapter is to help 10,000 women at SmartWorks by 2025, and then keep that going and grow that organization, so that the dream, really, the vision there, Farzana, is that any woman who finds herself, any woman who identifies as a woman who finds herself in a situation, knows, oh, I know SmartWorks. So there's definitely a vision to build SmartWorks into a nationwide brand, so any one of us could think, gosh, I'm in a pickle and I need help, and that it's there and it's top of mind, which it isn't yet at the moment. So that's sort of the first thing. The second thing is that I have a great deal of energy and excitement for building brands that matter in a better world, and I'm figuring out how I'm going to do that. We discussed earlier that agency land is having a really difficult time at the moment, and so I feel a sense of curiosity and openness, and, if you will, even freedom, having had a very, very big payroll for 30 years, of maybe there's a different way of doing this that might be um, more compatible with who I am today and what my own needs are. And there is very much a sense, as I get older, that life is for living. We're here for all but a nanosecond, and doing things and meeting people and trying to help other people and build businesses is an enormous privilege. So why would I stop doing that now, when I'm probably just at the moment in my life where I could be the most useful to people, more useful to people? So that very much sort of keeps me going a great deal. Um, Two other things. The book, which you very generously read, thank you. I do plan to try and do another book about what happens when business is tough, and when businesses do, fall. And I think that whether it's testosterone or intellect, I don't know, but the number of people who I have spoken to who haven't admitted that they had found themselves in a similar situation than I did has been really hard. And actually, if somebody had opened themselves to me and said, gosh, Julietta, that happened to me and I know exactly what you went through, it would have been immensely helpful. Because, when you find yourself in a moment of crisis, you genuinely think that you're probably the only person that's that stupid to find themselves in that situation. And therefore, I think a book will probably come. Books take a while. But I know the material and I know what I want to say, purely to help other people if they were to find themselves. I'd much rather be very open and honest about what I've got wrong than what I've got right. And I think that you can learn a great deal more from somebody who might be transparent about their failings. And I would like to be that person. And then finally, talking about female empowerment and women in the workplace and discrimination, age discrimination. I have two daughters, and I'm very proud of them both. And they haven't fallen far from the tree, but we are in discussion about looking at a family business and just thinking about how actually, we've sort of moved away from family businesses. And I wonder whether there's a moment to reconsider that. They're both fully employed with wonderful careers. But we are sort of, even over dinner, just thinking about, okay, well, if we did something with all our collective knowledge, what would that look like?
My God, that is so exciting. I mean, all three are incredibly exciting. And I particularly am very excited about the book because my first business, after I think 11, 12 years of running it, I had to do a voluntary liquidation. It took me about 3 years to emotionally get over it. And I just exited the industry actually because I was in accounting and finance. And I was so ashamed of it. I actually left the industry and and actually, in a way, I'm glad because then I found public relations, which is completely me.
Mm.
And so it ended up being positive. But I really did. I looked, and back then I couldn't find anything to talk about. Other people have gone through that experience. But what I realized is the year that I was managing the downturn of the business, and I learned more in that 1 year and the sort of the year afterwards, the aftermath, than I did over the whole 10 years of running the business. It's completely different set of wisdom that you walk away with because when the going is good, it's a very different environment than when things aren't working, and then and I remember when I had my business, it sort of went through this sort of negative vortex of just one thing after the other, and and managing your own energy levels, but most importantly, sort of being able to get up and get that confidence again to open up something new. So I would love to read that book, and I hope once you've written the book that you'd come back on and speak to us about the book. So I'd be really grateful. So now just in the closing section, a few quick fire questions. So number one, who is the communicator you admire the most? Past, present, could be alive, could have passed away, and doesn't have to be a professional PR person. Could be a politician, anybody who you feel really had the gift of communication.
Um, Weirdly, I think it would be Prince, the musician, and communication through music, because I think that my view is that Prince is probably one of the greatest composers of our time, like Beethoven was back in the day. And I think that that was true innovation and communication through music. And you listen to that music not like, oh, I'm just listening to Spotify. It's like the guy had something to say, and he had skill and genius that I really, really admire.
And my God, he's fashion as well. Just everything. I thought incredible. Now, thinkers. What thinkers, so authors, podcasts, poets, philosophers, have had the most impact on you? It could be a book that you've read, and you thought, my God, this is something that has really stayed with you over the years. It could be a poet, philosopher. Has there been any that have really had a profound impact on you in the way that you approach work and life?
Yes. Um, I have been very, very lucky to have had close friends who have always shared reading with me. And I've loved that as part of my life. And also, my husband is a great reader. So we have a lot to discuss about what he's reading or what I'm reading. And we very often share paragraphs from each other's books, etc. Um, I really am fascinated by Stoicism. And I believe that the world needs Stoicism right now. And there is a book that I love, which is called Discipline is Destiny. And I just really love that book because I think that there's quite a lot of moaning and there's quite a lot of difficulty in the world right now. And the values of the philosophy of Stoicism, I think, can help us. I think can help us. So I'm a sort of big I'm a big believer there. of the Stoics.
And final question: if you were giving advice to to Julietta coming out of university, what advice would you give her?
Believe in yourself. Believe in yourself, because again, my coach Liz Villani, who you should meet, Farzana, she's wonderful and she's got the most incredible coaching company. She would always say that you hold yourself back. You hold yourself back, and the phrase that she would always use was unclip your wings. Unclip your wings. And I think that without, I'm terrified of arrogance. I'm frightened of confidence, actually. I'd much rather walk into a room and say, look, I don't know the answer, but I'll try and find it out for you. Because I very often find that the loudest voices in the room actually know the least. So I find that very fascinating of, keep on learning and never ever think you know the answers, because the minute you do, you'll probably fall off your perch. So I think what I would say to myself is, as I finished in the book, you can, if you want to. And that's a personal choice. And then hopefully I would have said to myself, well, in 30 years when you're 55, you better get going with it on your next career.
Fantastic. Absolutely wonderful way to end. Julietta, thank you so much. I think you're probably not aware of how many of us have followed you for so long and have been inspired by your work and inspired by your philosophy and how you approach. And you sort of really help us to think a little bit deeper about how to build teams and what leadership looks like. And leadership doesn't have to be that sort of traditional sense. And there's new ways to be leaders, and giving everybody that sort of the alternative to look for, which has been wonderful. And you've been banging that drum for before it became fashionable. So thank you so much for everything that you've done for the industry, and for inspiring us all. Julietta, you've been incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Farzana. I want to say thank you back to you. And all of that flattery is completely unnecessary. And again, if I can help anybody in the industry from what I've learnt so far, it would be a huge pleasure. And I shall certainly, I just really wanted to say thank you to you for giving me this opportunity.